A pair of enormous theropods march up a valley. Well, one of them is enormous. At 10 tons and 13 meters of length, Tonbru is large for his kind. A Zentaur, the largest terrestrial predator in Kaimere. A few paces behind, at over 6 meters but only 700 kilos, is a lanky juvenile of his species. This is Baru. The pair are marching south. This journey takes them up the valleys and into distant mountains. They pass over a creek, where Baru pauses for a drink before following this giant stranger. Almost 200 miles to the north, another pair of Zentaur pass through a sunflower grove. Tanira, Baru's twin, maintains a steady jog. Though her left arm is tucked in and back as convention, her right hangs loose at her side. She follows close behind her and Baru's elder sister, Sharax'ha. For 3 days now, Sharax'ha has been leading Tenir'ha out of the basin. She has spent the last few dry seasons up north. The good times aren't as plentiful, but the dry season yet has abundance of good game for theropods of their size, and open dry ground that they can make good use of their speed. She's taking Tanira to the Titan Gardens. To the south, Baru is also in for a new habitat. Bamboo forests with scattered highland lakes between. This is not their destination, though. Just a passage between where they're headed and the basin whence they came. Baru sticks close to Tonbru, as close as he dares. This stranger is formidable, scarred and bristling. Baru has seen Zentaur cannibalize one another. The other young Zentaur in the basin, especially those older and larger than he and his sister, were just as deadly as the fireback terror birds. Even so, Tonbru doesn't seem aggressive. Perhaps not welcoming, but he's made no complaints about his little shadow. When they sleep at night, Baru rests closer each evening, and so far he's been fine. Being close to this stranger, even if he's dangerous, is preferable to the myriad unknowns that Baru smells and sees around them. During the days, Baru chases and catches a few pika and hegetothirs. Not a lot of larger options, at least none he's equipped to catch, but a mediocre meal is still a meal. The old Zentaur doesn't have a lot of good options for satisfying meals either, and besides, he hasn't time for hunting. Baru smells a range of prey options he's familiar with, but the bamboo forests are difficult to navigate, so he sticks to more open trails. Unlike Tonbru, Baru isn't large enough to force his own trails. Baru has to follow the paths that are already present. However, he rarely strays far. Baru has had companionship his whole life. He doesn't like to be alone. Losing Tonbru is a more daunting prospect than hunger. Baru smells an ungulate on their 3rd day in the bamboo forests. Its scent is carried down a creek. Though smell is an imperfect metric to estimate size, it seems large. Maybe worth investigating, but he's cautious. The trail leads him to a clearing, made wider by the messy foraging of something big. The scent is thick here. He's close. There's crunching up ahead as something chews through thick bamboo. A trio of broad-backed creatures are just ahead, crouched on the eastern shore. Light shining through the bamboo gives stripes to their scattered forms, but he identifies their size as being not much greater than their own. They're shaped like sloths, but smell like hoofed animals. Though he's locked in ahead, a startling noise comes from above. The long-armed form of a confounding beast crawls into view over a shallow creek bed. Like a sloth, its arms end in long, hooked claws. Its head is short and broad. However, despite this appearance, Baru's nose has not deceived him. This is a calicotherium of the genus Hesperotherium. Stallions of these monstrosities can exceed 2 tons, and this male isn't far behind the species maximum. As the stallion screams down at Baru, taking a mighty swipe with his long-clawed mitt, our young theropod flees in abject terror. To the north, Tenir'ha also explores new terrain. The trees here are enormous. Gone is the dominance of swamp cypress trees she's grown used to over the past few years, instead being replaced by the likes of Turchak cedar, juniper, ginkgo, redwoods, teak, baobab, and mahogany. The abundance of Turchak cedar here means their toxins are amplified compared to their scattered impact up in the highlands and being all but washed out in the basins. The soil is dry and firm underfoot. Movement of titans, coupled with the staggering size of the trees casting shadows, means that there's a surprising openness to the forest floor. Not many thickets, mostly just a few beds of shade-adapted ferns, and really only dense understory of larger ferns and horsetails near felled trees or rivers. This open terrain is ideal for cursorial predators like Zentaur. Indeed, she smells far more of her kind here than there were in the basin. Yes, there were adult Zentaur as top predators, and while there were a few other young Zentaur, they weren't ever a particularly abundant fauna. Here, Zentaur of her age and above have scent markings all around. Broadly speaking, she detects a lot of the same fauna. There's deer and antelope alongside elasmarians and thescelosaurs as the majority of fauna in her ideal hunting range. Baraphont, sloths, and large thescelosaurs are the more abundant big herbivores. Things too large for her to consider at this time. Majanook are more frequent here than in the basin, but still aren't especially common. Hyenas aren't especially abundant, but they're certainly more common here than in the wetlands. There's also no red panthers, surprising considering they were the most common large mammal predator in the basin. Common cockatrice are the most abundant predator in their size range, followed by sulan. She doesn't smell many olifant, slinghorn, lions, or terror birds. She doesn't know it, but these animals prefer dense forests. There are a few new creatures. Among the most common large mammal herbivore is the trocatul, something she's barely encountered in the basin and never hunted. Their herds aren't particularly large, typically around a dozen animals, but they are very common. Another frequent sight is a relative of the jacketed runendrake she hunted up in the mountains during her youth, the northern or violet helmeted runendrake. These are much more cursorial animals than their highland relatives. Their backs feature a tall hump to support strong muscles, and their tails slope down to anchor the massive leg and tail muscles that drive their running for an astonishingly powerful stride. They lack her endurance, but are among the fastest animals in the forest. They may lack the quills, spurs, or sharp plates of a common drake, but they yet have fangs and long hand claws that look like they would make capture not the end of the challenge in a hunt. Of course, the defining fauna of the Titan Gardens are the titans themselves. Tanira has known keratoderms her whole life, but she's only seen them at nesting sites, hatchlings trying to make it in the abundant cover of the swamp, or fringe pioneers like Sharax'ha. This is the true domain of Titans. She sees ample mixed herds of many ages and sexes. Most of these are immature individuals. For the first decade and a half of their lives, Titans are singularly focused on feeding and growing. Once they hit their first few tons, these gardens are their perfect habitat. Plenty of horsetails and ferns to make up the base of their diet, along with felled seeds and saplings of looming trees. The felling of even these enormous trees is facilitated by the adults now making their way back to the gardens after mating and laying in the basins. The steps of each 20 to 40 ton adult breaks the roots, so eventually even trees towering over them are weakened and collapse. This opens space for new growth and allows young titans and other comparatively small herbivores to feed. The toxin secreted by highly abundant Turchak cedar and spread in titan dung means there's a fairly narrow range of plants that can take hold in this soil. Mostly it's Turchak saplings and other plants adapted to these toxic and acidic conditions. However, plants are constantly adapting to this context, forcing the allelopathic toxins to become increasingly potent. Though grass is rare, several species have elbowed their way into a few scattered niches in the understory and near waters. We might more easily comprehend the evolutionary arms race raging between the beasts of Kaimere, but the conflicts of flora is just as aggressive and dynamic. Sharax'ha takes down a trocatul. It's a large cow. Tenir'ha is not one to stand back normally, but she's injured. Her right arm still hangs loose even days after her fight with the terror bird Rashu. Her sister seems happy for some company, but she's still a solitary predator and not willing to share the prime cuts. Sharax'ha also has a staggering caloric demand. She's not just eating for conventional growth and sustenance. She has begun the years in which she will be constructing her adult frame. She'll gain a ton or more each year over the next 4 to 6 years. Every meal counts, and she is ravenous. Only once her sister has had her fill of organs and flanks, Tanira steps in and feeds. Though Tanira's injury looks bad, it's a bit deceptive. Yes, there's torn tendons and muscle, and the exposure is infected, but the worst is merely a dislocation. It may right itself, but of course she's not medically aware of the issue or solution, so it can only be fixed by chance. Thankfully, she's been able to fill up most days on Sharax'ha's kills, so at least she's not going hungry. Up in the highlands, Baru is not so lucky. Tonbru might let him scavenge, but the old male isn't making any kills. There's no scraps to pick over. Their march presently takes them up and down a series of rippling mountains. There's plenty of lakes in the basins, and these sanctuaries are on the warmer side, but the higher passes get quite cold. There's a lot of game that Baru smells in the valleys, but it's all too densely vegetated for Tonbru to navigate with the sort of discretion he'd need to hunt. Instead, he either follows the same path he took to get here, or shoves his way through bamboo growing in the way. Not exactly ideal conditions to take down prey. It has now been a week since the old bull has eaten. He's huge and has ample reserves from his time in the basin. Baru is not so fortunate. A blessing comes to them in the form of another predator having made a kill along the slopes at the edge of the bamboo forest. Their savior is an animal that at first glance doesn't look too different from Baru. His legs are shorter and stocky, but overall the narrow jaws, long clawed hands, and slender frame are quite similar. Even a juvenile Zentaur has some bulk though, and this predator is shockingly compressed in comparison. At just over 7 meters, he's longer than Baru but weighs slightly less due to his almost comically narrow build from a front-wise perspective. This is a Darun, apex predator of these highland bamboo forests. Like them, he's a Megaraptoran, but of a distinct lineage, the Saraconichids. He's looming over the corpse of his most recent kill, a large male Gigantopithecus. He's already opened the belly and had a few bites. He may be king here in this hinterland, but he's no fool. Tonbru is over an order of magnitude larger. The Darun abandons the kill, slinking away into the bamboo forest. He's an excellent killer well suited for taking down local prey. That's a far easier prospect. He'd much rather kill another ape, Calicathir, or Takin than wait another second in the presence of a lowland monarch. Tonbru removes the limbs and swallows each, then carries on. Baru packs in as much of the ape as he can, then catches up to his massive companion. In the north, Sharax'ha and Tanira also dabble in scavenging. A troop of common cockatrice has taken down a young Wojun bear sloth. Though the dominant female that made the kill begins a challenge against the much larger Tenir'ha, Sharax'ha's arrival at the kill makes even this large cockatrice flee. However, most of their meals are taken by their own hunting efforts. The Runen Drake are faster than even Sharax'ha, especially in initial acceleration and sprint, but she is still able to take down a few through her superior endurance. Though the adults are more than Tanira dares tackle, after a few days supplementing with what remains of her sister's kills, she pursues a juvenile of a few hundred kilos. As are the adults, this young Elasmarian is faster than Tanira in its initial flight. Fortunately, she quickly overtakes the difference. With a bite and her good arm, she makes the kill. She does have to quickly retreat as the Drake's mother circles back and runs her off, but she's able to claim her kill a few minutes later. However, she doesn't get long before she's got company of her own. Another red sloth, the same species she and Sharax'ha stole a kill of a few days prior, now approaches Tanira with her slain Runen Drake. Like the Hukogor she met a few years prior, bear sloths like this Wojun supplement their primarily herbivorous diet with meat. He's almost 2 tons, backed by formidable claws and long tusks. Though she's defensive of her meal, she stands down, retreating as he makes a final rush. Bear sloths can make their own kills, but most of their meat is stolen. The next morning, as she and Sharax'ha awaken to begin the day's hunt, Tanira stretches. With a pop, she and Sharax'ha hop and look about in confusion. Tanira's arm has reset. She doesn't really notice the difference. It's merely the pain and discomfort are no longer lingering frustrations in the back of her mind. Yes, there's still some pain at the site of infection and injury, but it's largely improved. She will bear a scar for the rest of her life, and grow no feathers in that patch, but it's a small price to pay considering how close the hook of Rashu's beak was to opening her throat and ending her life. Her next few hunts are more successful now that she has a full arsenal as an increasingly familiar with local game. The cast of prey and other predators is becoming increasingly familiar to her. Of course, the most abundant competition are other young Zentaur. Generally speaking, size is everything in these conflicts. Tanira learns that she can reliably steal kills from younger Zentaur, but older ones run her off. On occasion, she and Sharax'ha will hunt together, but mostly they spend their downtime together. A few nights they do spend apart, but for the most part they are united in the evenings. It has become a comfortable routine, and both sisters are thriving. Again, and unfortunately, the same cannot be said of Tonbru and Baru. They are now deep in the mountains. The few valley lakes are scarce. No game to be had now. There's no longer dense forests of bamboo, but the terrain underfoot is too uneven to move at a relevant pace for hunting. Baru spots a species of small takin and ibex on the peaks and slopes, but not something he's yet desperate enough to chase. Another respite comes in the form of an ibex slain by a saber-toothed cat, the Haraud. Baru is able to effortlessly see the cat off, and he's able to get a few bites in before Tonbru runs him off in turn and swallows the rest whole following a decapitation. It's cold during the day, but at night it's absolutely frigid. Wind comes from the north, blowing a dusting of snow down onto Baru and Tonbru. Though Baru has experienced an occasional frost when he and his sister were in the highlands, he's never seen snow before. He thinks of his sister, perhaps wishing he could be beside her. His desire for some companionship sees him inch closer and closer to Tonbru. Finally, he's right beside the old bull, leaning against his warm bulk. Surprisingly, Tonbru accepts it. Perhaps there's something familiar about this young Zentaur's scent. They may be distant relatives. This might soften his opinion. Or maybe Tonbru isn't as averse to companionship as he might seem, just hasn't looked for it before. He's kept to himself for decades. He's never sought out company, short of brief trysts in the mating season. However, now that Baru is seeking his company, he doesn't lean away. Instead, he shifts so he's pressing back against the little Zentaur, letting a full side of Baru keep warm. After travel for a few more days, they are finally on the downward slope of the mountains. On this side of the mountains, it's very dry. Even the mighty storms that roll over the vast forests of the north for 1,000 miles rarely have the strength to cross the mountains, so there's only a very occasional northbound storm and spring-sourced rivers that irrigate this side of the mountains. Unlike the conifers, firs, and horsetails he's familiar with back home, Baru instead finds grass to be the most dominant plant here. The forests are mostly pine this high up. In many ways, it seems similar to the months he and Tanira spent hunting deer. Though Baru remains near his companion, as the downward slope march gets increasingly warm, he's ever more confident in meandering further. Though there's lots of grass, he hasn't seen much game along these slopes. Mostly takin, ibex, small elasmarians, and pika. Songs of bagpipe drakes, a type of elasmarian, ring out over the hills as the dispersing herds keep tabs on one another. Aside from this, the wind and an occasional bird song, it's mostly quiet. Any sound comes as a bit jarring from the general silence. Compared to the constant hum of insects, passerthers, and birds he's used to hearing throughout his life, it's an odd lack of ambience. Baru chases a few takin grazing in a valley. He's faster than them and quickly catches one of the younger females. Not long into his feast, however, something grumbles from within a nearby cave. With a shift in the wind, he smells a bear. Even the occasional uku bear he met in the basin were far too small to be concerned at his size, 200 kilos at most, though he still turns to see it off. The sun is blotted out as an enormous form looms into view. A cave bear stands tall on its hind legs. It's not looking for a fight, just an easy meal. At just over a ton, he is certainly larger than Baru, substantially taller in this position. When Baru doesn't immediately back off, though, the bear lunges. Before it can make contact, however, Tonbru's jaws clamp down on its neck with sufficient force to break. The old Zentaur was drawn to the smell of Baru's kill, but the bear will of course make a far more satisfying meal. Cave bears aren't common, having to retreat up here to these highlands, as much of their former range is lost, to a relative of the bear sloths Tenir'ha has encountered up north. He is one of the largest predators in this region, though none of that mattered in the face of a theropod 10 times his size. The bear marks Tonbru's first proper meal in over a week. Baru is happy to have his takin to himself. It is a welcome respite for both theropods. To the north, Tanira knows no such scarcity. As her wound heals, she is increasingly proficient with taking down Runendrake, while Sharax'ha favors Trocatul. Tanira tries her hand at her sister's favored prey. Unlike Runendrake, these Leptopterns are slower than our young Zentaur is at full sprint. However, their challenge comes with agility. While Runendrake are fairly easy to capture once you catch up, Trocatul are able to pivot and evade with shocking deftness. Tenir'ha takes more kicks to the chest than captures, and evasion more than both combined. She still hasn't managed to take one down once it is caught. They buck and turn, making grappling difficult to secure. Sharax'ha has become a master of grabbing the back of their neck and focusing her claws to the base of the throat, ignoring the center mass Tenir'ha keeps trying to target. Even with her many failures, however, Tanira is still reliably able to fill her belly most days. She is starting to become acquainted with other Zentaur in the area. While they aren't a social species, they still know the others in the region. While most are of a similar range of brown to gold as Tanira's family, a few have light cream patches or are so dark they only have noticeable patterns in good light. One of these darker Zentaur is a young male, a Ratu, who has taken a liking to Sharax'ha. At 3.5 tons, he's a full ton heavier than her, but that's to be expected. He's only a year her senior, but reaching maturity has triggered his growth. He's occasionally initiated a courtship dance with Sharax'ha. This is 2 months past the end of the mating season. She has no territory to claim and has little interest in mating even though he is mature. Aratu has of course never mated either. He has no idea what he's doing, just following instincts in her presence. Since he's not trying to steal her kills, Sharax'ha seems to tolerate his presence but never reciprocates the dance. Tanira has drawn far less amiable interest. A trio of young Zentaur, 2 males and a female, have been shadowing her for a few days. They are 2 years younger than her. At a little over 500 kilos, they're large for their age at around 2/3 her size. Not a threat on her own, but vexing in a group. There's something familiar about their scent, but Tanira can't quite place it. They look a little strange to her. They have a full coat of feathering, but it's sparse, pale and soft. Maybe she thinks them diseased, or perhaps their persistence is just off-putting to her. She hasn't gotten violent with them yet, but comes close as they bite her tail while she's feeding. It has now been a month since she and Baru were separated. She's getting used to life in the gardens and thriving alongside her elder sister. She does think of Baru from time to time. Perhaps she's missing him. Now and then she lets out a call. Of course, it's long since he could hear her. Perhaps she wonders where he is, but she doesn't spend much time looking. Her attention is on exploring this new home and growing in its bounty. She cannot find him, and can't afford to look too hard. She must eat and grow, and this is a perfect place to do so. After feeding on the bear, Tonbru and Baru descend down the mountains. Aside from a few small elasmarians and birds, most of the creatures they smell are mammals. Marsupials are especially common in a way they were not in the hollers and basin. Some passerthiers and other multituberculates also fill out the cast. Most of the larger game, however, are mammals. There is a new species of Baraphont. It's not near as large as the Baraphont he's known about since childhood, but they're still impressive beasts at around 2 to 3 tons. They form small herds. Baru doesn't know it, but these aren't resident animals. They're more common in the lowlands, but like their northern cousins, often range upland to explore fresh pastures. There's also a few of an oddly enormous multituberculate, the lasuga. They are a giant cousin of the more abundant spur-footed marmots. Like their little cousins, they dig short burrows to keep warm and avoid predators. They feed on a range of pines, both needles, cones, and the bark. Most abundant of the resident animals up in these highlands is a species of takin. Not the same he saw in the mountains. These are larger and lighter. Like the Baraphont, they form small herds but are far more abundant than the toxodonts. Like takin in the mountains, these are quite sure-footed, quickly taking to high ground as Baru jogs nearby. He considers hunting them. After all, ranging between 600 kilos to over a ton, they would make a fine meal. However, since Tonbru continues down the slopes, Baru follows him. They spend the night beside a creek. Baru tries his hand at hunting takin during twilight, but they have far superior night vision and know the terrain better and easily evade his hunts. He also finds the body of a young takin in the tree, cached up there by a leopard. The panther is nowhere to be seen, and the body is far out of Baru's reach. Hungry and disappointed, Baru returns to Tonbru. That morning, the boys continue their journey down the mountains. Though there is still plenty of takin and Baraphont, come late morning, an abundance of more familiar and enticing game greets Baru. An enormous herd of deer. These are red stags, another species of servalses like the trident deer. These are massive, with does 300 and bulls up to 500 kilos. The herd assembles near the highlands are in rut. Not far off is an even larger deer, the rose elk, which stands 2.5 meters at the shoulder and weighs in at 800 kilos. They aren't nearly as abundant as red stags, but rose elk still gather here. Though Baru is tempted to hunt, Tonbru carries on down the hill. He's not interested in deer. There are other predators here. Though Baru has smelled them for several days now, he finally spots a group of Homotherium. 2 have blonde fur, one is a light brown, while the other is black. They are a different species than he's used to. Generally, they have lighter fur and are a bit larger, but overall, this is a very similar animal. One-on-one, he wouldn't worry, but 4 against him has slight cause for concern, especially the largest male. Luckily, he's not their target. They're more interested in the deer. Even so, he does look back toward Tonbru. Perhaps he should follow. Eventually, hunger gets the better of Baru. Thankfully, he manages to quickly bring down a red stag. It was an easy enough catch and kill, as the bull had been battling other males all morning. Baru doesn't want his guide getting far. After quickly packing in the prized organs, he abandons the kill and runs after Tonbru. The family of Homotherium watching from the sidelines quickly converge. Much like the deer, Barafont, and cats, there are other relatives of animals he grew up with. Water buffalo in the basin up north are around 200 to 400 kilos. Viable prey, even the largest bulls. The relatives here, aurochs, are enormous by comparison. Aurochs can weigh up to a ton in large males, and even the 500-kilo cows don't look like they'd be easy to take down. Baru only sees a few on the fringes of nearby pine forests, but their scent is more common within. He's not hungry anymore, and is intent on catching up to Tonbru. He smells no other Zentaur here. No terror birds or cockatrice either. Strange, considering their incredible abundance of game, but a welcome absence all the same. He smells other predators, all familiar. Hyenas, leopards, jackals, and lions. They all smell a bit off from what he's used to, but nothing revolutionary. At his 700 kilos, none of these are animals Baru needs to worry about. The ground is finally starting to level out. Soon he passes a herd of among the most abundant large herbivores in this ecosystem. Horses. He's never smelled anything quite like it. The closest match was the Hugor Calicathir that gave him such a fright in the bamboo forests. As one of the stallions unleashes a similar scream at him, Baru runs off. His mind may change later, but for now, his fearful encounter with the Calicathir has made him decide horses are too dangerous to risk hunting. There is also a herd of the first large dinosaurs he has seen here. It is an Elasmarian, indeed within the same genus as the one his twin sister now favors, Trechosaurus. These Runendrake are larger and a bit stockier, but generally similar. They are primarily browsers, feeding on the patches of trees, though he spots them dabble in grass. At 1.5 to 3 tons, the adults are more than he's equipped to tackle, though there's an abundance of juveniles decreasing from adulthood by half a ton or so each year. These might be more viable prey, but he's more interested in meeting up with Tonbru once more. Finally, later that morning, Baru catches up to the old Zentaur. Not many footprints in this hard soil, and the strongest winds blow down the mountains, so catching up to the scent was difficult. Tonbru continues his walk. Baru jogs up beside him. Their march continues to evening. They pass another few herds of Barafont, one of them being much larger than those in the highlands. Scattered amongst the Barafont are dozens of birds. Emus. Like the uru he's grown up so used to tackling, these flightless birds could make a satisfying meal, but they're smaller and likely more nimble. Might not be worth the chase. Not worth the effort to catch. There's also a rhino grazing within the herd. It is a species of Stephanorhinus. A mixed feeder equally at home in forests and grasslands. The rhino or Barafont would both be an easy kill and filling meal for Tonbru, but still the great predator ignores them. His aim is just ahead. 4 young bull mammoths. At between 5 and 7 tons each, they're around the size of the largest bull olifant Baru knows from the north, though are considerably taller. Though young mammoths are concerned about several hunters, especially Homotherium, these bulls are long since immune to predation from resident killers. However, at the scent of approaching Zentaur upwind, 3 of the mammoths quickly turn and aim their curved tusks at Tonbru. This is not the first Zentaur they have met. Indeed, they may well have even encountered Tonbru himself in seasons past. The 4th mammoth does not react as aggressively, but mimics the positions and bellows as well, trusting his companions. Zentaur are rare here, with only females like Tonbru spending much of their lives in the south, where there's abundant game only they can exploit. Most are to the east, with easier passage. So far, Zentaur have not established a resident population. Not enough females to have settled down and keep the males here. It may be hard to nest and perhaps too cold for younger chicks. However, hunting mammoths is a superb source of food, especially for Zentaur in the peak of their growth. Between the ages of 12 and 16, Zentaur grow a ton or more. This is when they rocket to skeletal maturity. Some might continue growth, especially bulking up to fill out this frame they've spent their adolescence constructing, but usually they slow growth by around 18. If they don't get enough food in these years, they won't be able to ever make up the deficit. This is why Baru's mother was almost 5 tons smaller than the great Asha. Priha isn't in poor health, she's just a lot smaller. She also doesn't need as much food as Asha. This plasticity in size is an adaptation, not a deficit. It allows the species to be quite flexible. That said, with great size comes dominance and success when times are good. Tonbru first came to the southern steppes when he wasn't much older than Baru. He then remained here for 5 years as he grew during his peak, before returning north to begin mating. While he was in the south, mammoths were his favored prey. His great size today is in no small part due to getting a massive frame in this context decades prior. Baru may now well be set up for the same success if he's able to learn how to take down these behemoths. Unfortunately, their cover is blown. The mammoths keep their tusks aimed at the enormous theropods. Tonbru doesn't seem to mind. He didn't approach from downwind. A rookie mistake. He seems indifferent, though, and carries on. The mammoths don't know it, but he wasn't hunting. He's surveying. Taking stock of what's in this region. Trying to determine if it's worth remaining. He's hunted 1,000 miles in either direction. Nothing special tying him here. Baru doesn't know any of this, of course. He's just taking in all the new sights and smells. That said, he's already getting very hungry. He filled up on deer that morning, but Baru is already looking for his next meal. Though at 8.5 years old, he's still a few years from his staggering growth spurt, he's still growing fast and his metabolism is working overtime. Another massive herd of ungulates meanders nearby, a species of deer. They're intermediate in size between trident deer and red stags. A fine meal, and likely easy for Baru to catch and kill at his age. As they survey, they are blessed by a caribou already slain. By scent blowing their way, Baru can tell it was brought down by a lion. At first, this odor is of little consequence. Baru is more than 4 times larger than a large lion back in the basin. However, the lion that looms over this caribou is much larger than the lions back home. At 600 kilos, he's almost as large as Baru. Yet, it only takes a brief look at Tonbru before the lion stops mid-roar and flees his carcass. Though Baru might hope for a shank, it seems the better part of 2 days without a meal has finally caught up to Tonbru. With a foot on the antlered head, the old bird rips the reindeer in half, then swallows each whole. Once he's finished, only the head and a few messy remains are there for Baru. It was already partially consumed by the lion that killed it, so not much to fill even a large Zentaur, much less any to spare. Without acknowledgement, the enormous theropod begins a slow walk toward the nearby forest of birch, maple, and pine. Baru decides to catch his own meal, and what he was able to collect was entirely unsatisfying. The herd of caribou nearby initially presents an appealing target, but he quickly slows when he notices a few herds of horses scattered about. His caution alerts his prey to his presence, and the herd keeps their distance. Not in the mood to give up, he makes several attempts. Numerous failed charges. Though caribou are faster than he is, he can run at his top speed for far longer and eventually closes in. However, caribou are frustratingly deft on their feet, especially as they retreat upland. The horses, thankfully, carry on toward the lower ground, so are no longer making Baru so nervous. He continues on after the caribou with renewed enthusiasm, but each time he almost has reached them, they evade or sprint ahead. His endurance is far superior, but the shifting herds and increasing wariness of the uneven terrain, frustration is taking a greater toll than fitness. Also, with each moment as twilight sets to darkness, his vision becomes increasingly paired while the caribou are fine. He hisses and stamps. After what seems like the 100th miss, he launches himself onto a fallen log, snapping and biting at the bark. Finally, he gives up, resigned to failure, and settles down with Baru at the forest's edge. In the morning, Tonbru stretches, then departs. This time he's keeping to the trees. He scans the horizon, sensing not only the direction of wind around them, but also watching the shifting waves of grass to see whether the wind accounts for it in his advance. There's a few scattered tree stands out in the fields beyond. It's not much, but he cuts across the field toward them, reaching what seems to be an ideal approach. Baru follows, but stays back. So far, he's seen Tonbru scavenge far more than he's killed. However, he's learned much of the most important hunting lessons by observation. He can see clear differences in how Tonbru walks now compared to the past few weeks. Now, the enormous monarch is on the hunt. Once he's near the trees, Baru sees what his mentor has been watching. The 4 mammoths they spotted the day before. The 3 of them are further out. One of the younger bulls is closer to the trees. The one who didn't seem to recognize Zentaur as much of a threat. He's presently scratching his shoulder against a paper birch, rolling the bark off in the process. These mammoths almost exclusively eat grass, and they enjoy the security of an open field, but sometimes there's just the wrong itch to scratch, and it's nice to have a few trees around. Tonbru steps closer. A trumpet out in the field draws Baru's attention. The largest and eldest of the bulls charges forward, bellowing out an alarm. Before the young mammoth can turn, Baru is upon him. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to ideally position himself. With his old male much preferred a flawless execution, Tonbru has not eaten well of late, and seems to decide it's worth a rough tumble. Tonbru lunges forward at the mammoth's back leg as it turns. It manages to sidestep, driving a tusk toward Tonbru's chest. Before it can make contact, though, Tonbru bites the base of the tusk, turning to head away. He is forced to step back as the mammoth pushes toward him instead of trying to get away. It kicks forward further, pressing the attack. With a low grunt, Tonbru pushes and turns, letting the mammoth's efforts turn in an arc. Though he often walks slow, he's still a lightly built and agile predator for his tremendous size, and uses this great strength to good use. He rears up, pressing his chest down on the mammoth's back so he can grasp with claws and bite higher on the neck. However, before he can execute, the other mammoths have closed in. Tonbru disengages, taking several steps back to keep the injured mammoth between himself and the reinforcements. He is forced to retreat. The mammoths continue after, forcing him and Baru to continue out on the open grass toward the main forest, where the mammoths halt. They know better than to pursue Zentaur into ample cover. Even so, they bellow and roar from the edge of the forest. Even the younger bull has followed, adding his bellows to the chorus. After 10 minutes of this, the mammoths finally back up, still facing the woods, only easing once they've added considerable distance. Unfortunately for Tonbru, his attack was comprised mostly of surface injuries. Painful, but unlikely to fester. The young mammoth bull will survive, and take in the scent of Zentaur far more seriously going forward. Though he didn't witness a successful kill, Baru still learned an important lesson. Mammoths are intelligent, social, and cooperative. Oliphant cows helped one another, but often their reaction was slower, and only the eldest matriarch was large enough to properly risk a brawl. Oliphant bulls are solitary. Mammoths are not. Even so, Tonbru seems undeterred. He's failed plenty of hunts. He needs a meal, but doesn't seem especially frustrated by this outcome. Doesn't throw a tantrum like Baru did the night before. Tonbru settles down to relax and recuperate, but Baru is hungry. Rather than try to catch caribou and fail again, he instead explores the forest behind them. The trees here are broadly similar to those he encountered in the highlands back when he and Tanira spent a year hunting trident deer. It's a much lower elevation, but the temperature is similar. He smells a range of familiar animals. Again, he encounters one of the rumen drake. This one's a large male, 3.5 tons. It's busy browsing, but does hiss down at Baru as he approaches. Baru gives this creature a wide berth. His next encounter is with a massive black bear sloth drinking from a creek. At around 3 tons, it's far too large for Baru to even consider hunting. The sloth ignores him, seeming quite content to feast on the currants growing in the thicket. He finally comes across a skeletal carcass of an aurochs, a few days old and cached under some leaves. It's been quite cleaned over after being killed by a lion, but Baru tides himself over on whatever cold scraps remain. There are pheasants here. He chases several, though likely more out of boredom than genuine effort. He also comes across a range of small mammals, chasing some into burrows and up trees. He catches a bandicoot, but at just over 2 kilos, hardly a satisfying meal. The scent of deer catches his attention. Hunting a deer in the cover of a forest seems quite viable. However, the deer his nose leads him toward are anything but potential prey. A cow moose with 2 calves. She's nearly a ton, and her 5-month-old calves are already each 350 kilos. The calves might be viable prey, but their mother looming over is a formidable guardian. Not far upstream is a greater cause of concern. A bull moose. He's just over 2 tons and stands nearly 3 meters at the shoulder. One of the largest hoofed animals in this region. This cow has just weaned her calves and is ready to mate. The bull has come here to oblige her desires. However, he's not alone. A younger bull approaches from downwind of Baru. If he notices the scent of the young Megaraptoran, he doesn't seem to care. This younger bull weighs 1.5 tons. Far short of the older bull in terms of mass, but he's almost as tall, younger, and more energetic. He rushes to the older rival, and Baru falls back. The cow and her calves also seem nervous. She hasn't scented Baru, and actually pushes her young toward him in an effort to keep them away from the impending duel. The giant moose clash. As they are forest animals, their antlers sweep back, rather than spanning out like the antlers of the rose elk Baru saw the day before. The brawl quickly sees the older male prove advantage of his superior mass, shoving the younger male back toward the stream and closer to Baru and the calves. Baru flees. Though he might have had a chance at catching one of the young moose, it seems he's overwhelmed and not willing to risk getting caught up in the duel. This proves a wise decision. Just as he begins to slow, the younger male moose gallops toward him. Thundering at twice his mass, the giant deer could easily crush him underfoot. Thankfully, it's not trying to. With the older bull hot on his hooves, the young moose is just trying to get away. Perhaps someday, moose may well prove to be a perfect prey for a Zentaur like Baru who grew up hunting deer. However, that's a few years off. For now, he makes himself scarce as the older bull moose scores several painful reminders on the younger male to prove who runs this forest. Out on the prairie, Tonbru has caught a Baraphont. He's had his fill, and lets Baru come out and scavenge first. There's an assembly of hyenas and wolves waiting for their turn. Baru has seen both before, but they are of different species than their counterparts in the basin. Jackals here are twice the size of their counterparts in the north. These spotted hyenas are around the same size, a bit shorter and more robust, though the main distinction is in social structure. Like cockatrice, they usually hunt alone but live in small groups. While hyenas up north were rare and lived in groups of 3 to 5, hyenas here are much more socially complex, with clans numbering between a few dozen to over 100. They may normally bring down their own prey. Hyenas are happy to scavenge, especially since their robust jaws are capable of processing more meat than other predators. However, after Baru finished, another scavenger arrives to claim a turn before the hyenas and wolves. In much of Baru's youth, he knew of pterosaurs. Bat-hawk tapajarids were a potential threat for the first few months of his life, but after that, they weren't much more than a nuisance. This bat-hawk, however, could well pose a threat. Standing just over 4 meters tall and weighing in at half a ton, this Titan crow is a formidable sight to behold. He's just arrived from his primary feeding ground to the south, on a continent far across the ocean. Winters in Kaishel get colder than he prefers. Most of his kind are local, spending much of the year in the southern islands. However, like our Zentaur, some male Titan crows choose to migrate further south to hunt an abundance of game without much competition. Soon, he will begin searching for a mate. Titan crows need 2 to 3 months to incubate. Not as long as Zentaur eggs, but still long enough that they can't afford to mate and lay during the spring if they want their chicks to have enough time in the seasons of plenty to grow in size and strength. This Titan crow is used to stopping along the coast and bulking up before seeking a mate back down in the southern islands. None of the native predators dare challenge him. However, he knows better than to challenge a Zentaur and waits for Baru to back off before stepping up for his portion. Over the next few days, they remain in this region. Baru manages to catch and kill a caribou after many more attempts. He also tries several of their herbivores on the grasslands, including a young Baraphont, but continues to avoid horses. On the 5th day, a herd of 40 mammoth cows pass by. They are engaged in an infrasonic conversation with the bulls Tonbru failed to bring down days prior. The bulls gather, acting as a buffer as the herd passes. Tonbru doesn't even get up, but he does note their presence. Back in the forest, another species of proboscidean instead has his attention. What Baru first assumed was the scent of another mammoth instead reveals itself to him as he stalks a young moose cow. This is Paleoloxodon, Drenduga in the common tongue of Kaimere. This bull is a young adult, though at 13 tons, he's already far larger than the oldest mammoth they encountered out on the grasslands. Like the mammoths, he has a coat of brown fur, though his is far more sparse than their coats. Baru lets this huge elephant pass. It doesn't even cross his mind that this could be prey, but to Tonbru, approaching from downstream under the cover of ample foliage, this is actually more viable than the mammoths half his size, mostly due to a simple fact. This bull is alone. Drenduga aren't nearly as socially complex as mammoths. For them, size is their favored defense. The average member of his species is almost twice the size of a mammoth of the same age and sex. He can hear the distant infrasound of mammoths conversing and coordinating, but unlike Drenduga cows who use this to lay low, he's not paying it much heed. In his mind, mammoths are constantly fretting and chatting. His kind likely matches their intelligence, but with his size and strength and no calves to look after, there's not much reason to pay attention. The biggest predators in this region are lions, which would effortlessly be crushed underfoot. Even the 3-ton sloths or occasional cave bears have been too small to worry about for over a decade. He has simply never met a predator worth his concern by this age and size. He's from the far west. They never get Zentaur there. Indeed, it's rare for Zentaur to make this crossing here as well. They're far more likely to cross the mountains to the east, where there are several narrower passages with lower mountains, and therefore much easier to pass back and forth if they are still able to mate with female Zentaur in the north. It's understandable that this Drenduga doesn't have much to worry about. This overconfidence takes him through the forest. He shoves down trees and forages for a wide range of plant material. Unlike mammoths, who specialize in grass almost to the exclusion of all other foliage, Drenduga are bulk-feeding generalists, having more interest in quantity than particulars. If it's a plant, this bull will eat it. His meanderings take him between a few trees. Tonbru decides this is a perfect place to strike. He approaches from behind, keeping the wind ahead. His movements are slow, careful. This bull is not only heavier than him, he's a lot taller. Getting into the optimal strike position is going to be difficult. A bull of this size could easily kill Tonbru if it goes poorly. Tonbru decides attacking to deal injury rather than establishing a grapple is his best way forward. Or perhaps it's not intentional, just the closest easy target. With a silent approach, Tonbru bites down hard on the bull's lower leg and yanks back. Positioned between trees as he is, the bull is unable to about-face and defend himself. He also can't kick back, as Tonbru has his leg off the ground. While Zentaur lack the astonishing bite force of T-Rex, he's still able to rend muscle and tendon. Tonbru keeps backing up, preventing the Drenduga from reclaiming any stability. The elephant tries to turn, but ends up pressing against a hawthorn tree. His tusks are tangled in the lower branches. Tonbru disengages, this time biting on a fold of skin where leg meets belly. Baru can't quite see the injury, but it adds agony to the elephant's furious and confused bellows. This combination of injury means the elephant cannot reliably bear weight on his left leg, and slumps down in that direction. With deftness alarming at his size, Tonbru steps back, then rounds to the other side. The Drenduga's tusks break free of the branches above, but his head is still high as the Zentaur closes in. Tonbru lunges ahead. His jaws clamp hard at the back of the elephant's neck. Pulling its head up, Tonbru then employs his claws for a swift kill. Several months pass by. Baru hunts caribou on the prairies and red stag once they come back down the mountains and fill out the scattered woodlands. He also takes a liking to boar, which are fairly abundant in the forests. Once he learns that horses are viable prey and not nearly as dangerous as he first supposed, they also become quickly a favorite of his. They're a bit faster than him, and he tends to avoid the larger stallions, but for the most part, they become a reliable prey. The winter is cold by his perspective, but for this region, it's fairly mild. Only twice is there even enough frost worth mentioning, and it doesn't snow. Baru is now 9 years old. He's over 800 kilos, having grown well on a diet of the abundant game here on the prairies. Baru and Tonbru tend to return to the same clearing to sleep, though spend most days are apart hunting their different game. Baru does observe the giant theropod take down a few mammoths and elephants, learning from the master how to approach and execute. Like Baru, Tonbru is generally cautious. He spends hours, if not days, selecting a target, and has much higher rates of success because of his meticulous approach. As spring arrives, there's only the occasional rain that makes it over the mountains. It's enough that flowers bloom and a radiance of new colors takes over the prairie. There's no flooding, but it's humid enough for this abundance to grow. Up in the north, the wet season is in full swing. Tanira is also 800 kilos. The Titan Gardens have been kind to her. She's gotten quite talented at hunting trocatul and runendrake. On the banks of a stream, she's just brought down a trocatul. At a ton, this kill was quite a rodeo, but observations of her sister and applying techniques has proven fruitful. It also helped that dry soil and a slick overcoat of mud leveled the disparity in Tenir'ha's speed and her prey's agility. However, she's unwittingly made this kill upwind of a dominant Zentaur's territory. During the dry season, this female was fairly restricted in her movements, attending close to her nest. Now that her young have hatched, she's more diligent about marking her territory. These boundaries are known to resident Zentaur, but not a relative newcomer like Tanira. As far as she was concerned, this area was generally avoided by her peers, so worth exploring. This notion paid off given her present meal. A low rumbling, punctuated by flashes of lightning and a clap of thunder, is prelude to deadly company. A massive head passes into view around the craggy river bend. It is dark, featherless, and broad. Crimson eyes glare from below a crown of dark horns. As the full body steps into view, the true enormity can be appreciated. Since Tanira last saw her, 8 years ago, she has grown into her enormous frame. 15 tons is her claim to dominion. Sharax'ha, Queen of the North. As the Colossus advances, Tanira makes the wise decision to flee. She will not hunt here again. Down south, Tonbru and Baru are awakened by a distant rumble of their own. For a moment, Baru anticipated the first proper storm, but the air is dry. Though the young Megaraptoran is confused, Tonbru knows this sound well. Out on the fields, the caribou, Barafont, horses, mammoths, and other grazers are all moving upland as new herbivores approach. Bison. These large bovids march in their thousands. They're not as tall as moose, but just as massive. Cows range between 5 and 800 kilos, while the largest bulls are upward of 2 tons. Males are armed with horns spanning almost 2 meters from tip to tip. Imposing beasts on their own, but the real marvel is the size of the herd. They are gathered in their thousands. Despite these numbers, however, bison are not especially abundant as a species. They are concentrated in a few massive herds who march up and down the coast. These migrations mean they are able to feed their tremendous numbers, but it does mean that animals who might otherwise dominate bison, like mammoths, toxodonts, and rhinos, all clear out as the bison approach. This is a time of plenty for predators. Not all members of the herd are so enormous. There's plenty of smaller cows that a large lion or group of hyenas or homotherium could reasonably handle. Also, this herd has recently given birth. Around 2,000 calves now bolster their numbers. They are generally kept toward the middle, especially as predators assemble. However, the most dangerous animal in this habitat follows the bison. Baru met humans many years ago. He and Tanira spent many months comfortably sharing space with Homo altus in the highlands. This is the same species of humans, but they lack the security of their mountain-dwelling kin. These are hunters who live in the open, so are much more aggressive by necessity. They've already made several kills. Using long, powerful bows, they're able to bring down buffalo toward the rear of the herd. Bison defend their injured members, so often these predators must wait for a few hours before they can assemble and begin butchery. They have to defend their kills from hyenas especially, leading to slain members of both species in a great conflict. While Baru has a fairly neutral opinion on humans, as they didn't bother him and Tanira but also weren't a source of food, Tonbru keeps his distance. Though they now comprise barely visible scars amidst his vast assortment of more overt marks, in his youth, Tonbru was pierced in the chest by human spears and several arrows. The injuries healed, but he was nearly slain and left with a distinct fear of these comparatively tiny primates. He follows the mammoths up to the highlands. Tonbru would rather face a cohort of bull mammoths than risk conflict with humans. Once the bison and their strange predators move on, life in the field resumes. Even though the vast herds chewed most of the grass to the root, they fertilized the pastures in their march. One of the rare rainstorms that comes up from the south passes over them, affording much-needed refreshment. A few weeks after the departure of the bison herds, the fields are thriving thanks to water and fertilization. In this way, bison are extremely beneficial to the habitat. Other herbivores must clear before them, but in their wake is a time of plenty. For the next few months, Baru grows fast. He gains over 100 kilos in a short time, bulking up on this plethora of prey. In early autumn, Tonbru knows it will soon be time for him to cross the mountains and seek a mate. He's been bulking up on a diet of elephants. He could probably make it. However, as occurred 2 years prior, he seems to decide it's not worth it. Perhaps he didn't get adequate surplus. Maybe he's just tired. It's a highly demanding journey. Instead, he chooses to remain with Baru, enjoying the bounties of this territory rather than making the perilous march north. The wet season was also kind to Tenir'ha and Sharax'ha. Tanira matches her twins' 950 kilos, while Sharax'ha is now 3.5 tons. Thankfully, there is enough game that Sharax'ha is tolerant of her sister's presence, though once Tanira reaches maturity, that acceptance may waver. After a year apart, our twins now both grow into formidable young vassals. They are well positioned to grow and thrive. Their next challenge will be reaching maturity. Soon, their bodies will demand a great stockpile of reserves. The flex as a bowstring is drawn. Once it is released, the race will be on. It will be imperative to grow as much as possible in these years in their mad, violent race toward monarchy.